The German Gebirgsjäger mountain brigade was advancing through the Alpine Pass when Staff Sergeant Samuel "Powder" Richardson realized his grandfather's Colorado snow techniques were either going to stop the most elite mountain warfare unit in the entire Wehrmacht, or get every man in the 10th Mountain Division killed by Oberstleutnant Klaus "Ice Wolf" Brenner's legendary Alpine hunters, the only German mountain troops that had never been defeated during 3 years of mountain warfare across Europe, that had conquered every peak from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean without suffering a single tactical reverse. "Powder, they're moving like ghosts up there," Corporal Tommy "Slope" Martinez whispered from his observation post as the German mountain troops climbed through the treacherous alpine terrain with mechanical precision that defied the brutal weather conditions, where Brenner's Gebirgsjäger had been systematically destroying Allied mountain positions with specialized tactics that had conquered every peak from Norway to the Carpathians without suffering a single tactical defeat during operations that had eliminated entire Allied mountain battalions. The tactical situation was impossible by every mountain warfare standard that mattered in Alpine combat, because Brenner's Gebirgsjäger battalion represented the pinnacle of German mountain warfare development and could move through snow conditions that immobilized conventional infantry while attacking from elevations that defeated Allied defensive positions through superior mountaineering skills that had been refined through generations of Bavarian Alpine training and enhanced with the most advanced cold weather equipment available to the Wehrmacht. The mathematical reality of Alpine warfare was brutal and undeniable. Brenner's mountain troops could approach Allied positions using routes that conventional defensive planning had considered physically impossible to traverse, while carrying specialized equipment that functioned reliably in sub-zero temperatures where Allied weapons experienced mechanical failures that reduced combat effectiveness to levels below operational requirements. The 10th Mountain Division was equipped with standard cold weather gear and conventional mountaineering equipment, but the German Gebirgsjäger had been specifically outfitted with experimental Alpine warfare technology including specialized climbing equipment, weapons designed for high-altitude combat, and cold-weather clothing systems that allowed sustained operations in conditions that would incapacitate conventional infantry forces within hours of exposure. But what the legendary German mountain commander didn't know was that Samuel Richardson had grown up in his grandfather's Colorado mining camp in the Rocky Mountains at 11,000 feet elevation, where old Jake Richardson had taught him that snow wasn't just an obstacle but a weapon, and sometimes the best way to stop mountain climbers was to make the mountain itself fight against them using natural forces that no amount of training could overcome, because the Rocky Mountains had been teaching survival lessons to Colorado miners for over 50 years. The weather conditions during the German advance were perfect for Gebirgsjäger operations, with moderate snowfall that provided concealment while maintaining visibility for tactical coordination, creating environmental advantages that allowed German mountain troops to execute complex maneuvers that would have been impossible for conventional infantry forces operating under similar conditions. "Slope, trust this powder," Sam shouted as he worked frantically with specialized snow techniques that he'd learned from his grandfather's mining operations, using methods that old Jake had developed for creating controlled avalanches to clear dangerous snow accumulations from mine shafts and mountain roads during Colorado's brutal winter seasons. If stories of family mountain traditions and unlikely alpine victories move you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss similar stories of ordinary people using inherited knowledge to achieve extraordinary results during mountain warfare. The snow techniques that would change everything had been developed by Colorado miners using methods that had been passed down through 4 generations of Richardson men who understood that survival in the Rocky Mountains required the ability to predict and control snow behavior through understanding of meteorology and terrain analysis that could mean the difference between life and death during mountain winters. The unstoppable German mountain hunters that terrorized the Alps had built their reputation through systematic conquest of Allied mountain positions that had produced complete tactical dominance across every mountain theater of operations, making Oberstleutnant Klaus Brenner the most feared Alpine commander in the European theater and the nemesis of Allied mountain warfare units throughout occupied Europe who had learned to fear the sight of German mountain troops on any ridgeline. Brenner was 35 years old, A career Wehrmacht officer who had commanded Gebirgsjäger units since the 1940 invasion of Norway and had developed mountain warfare techniques that maximized German advantages in alpine mobility and cold weather combat through specialized training that produced soldiers capable of fighting effectively in conditions that defeated conventional infantry formations throughout the mountain theaters of World War II. Klaus had earned his commission through the prestigious German Mountain Warfare School in Mittenwald, where he had studied under legendary Alpine commanders who had developed the tactical doctrine that made German mountain troops the most effective high-altitude combat forces in the world. His education had included advanced mountaineering, cold-weather survival, and the specialized equipment techniques that allowed Gebirgsjäger to operate in environments where other military units suffered catastrophic losses due to weather exposure and altitude effects. The German Gebirgsjäger represented the pinnacle of mountain warfare expertise, specifically trained for high-altitude combat operations in extreme weather conditions where conventional military tactics failed due to terrain challenges that required specialized equipment, advanced mountaineering skills, and tactical adaptations that only elite mountain troops could execute successfully during sustained operations above the tree line. Brenner's mountain warfare doctrine was based on exploiting terrain advantages that conventional military thinking considered insurmountable obstacles, using German superiority in mountaineering skills to achieve tactical positions that provided commanding views of enemy positions while offering escape routes that pursuing forces couldn't follow without specialized alpine training and equipment. Klaus Brenner had earned his nickname Ice Wolf through his ability to lead mountain operations in weather conditions that grounded other military units, using blizzards and extreme cold as tactical weapons while positioning his troops for attacks from elevations that provided commanding views of Allied positions and escape routes that conventional forces couldn't pursue due to technical mountaineering requirements. Brenner's mountain brigade had been equipped with specialized alpine gear that had been developed specifically for Wehrmacht mountain operations, including climbing equipment that functioned reliably in sub-zero temperatures, cold weather clothing systems that allowed sustained operations in conditions that would incapacitate conventional infantry, and weapons systems that maintained mechanical reliability at high altitudes where standard military equipment experienced failures. The psychological impact of Brenner's reputation was as devastating as his tactical capabilities, because Allied mountain troops throughout the European theater understood that encountering the Ice Wolf meant facing an opponent whose alpine expertise had never been successfully countered by conventional mountain warfare tactics, creating fear and uncertainty that affected Allied tactical decision-making throughout mountain operations. Enemy positions bearing 270, elevation 2,400 meters, Brenner announced to his battalion through encrypted radio communications as the German Gebirgsjäger positioned themselves for the coordinated mountain attack that would eliminate the 10th Mountain Division's defensive positions before Allied reinforcements could reach the strategic Alpine Pass. Using tactics that had proven successful during campaigns across Norway, the Caucasus, and the Italian Alps. Brenner's combat record was unprecedented in German mountain warfare and had become the standard by which other Alpine commanders measured their effectiveness. Complete tactical victories across Norway, the Caucasus, and the Italian Alps without ever retreating from a mountain objective, including the destruction of 3 Allied mountain battalions and the capture of strategic passes that had been considered impregnable by conventional military analysis. The tactical advantages that Brenner's Gebirgsjäger provided to German mountain operations extended far beyond individual engagements, because the knowledge that an undefeated mountain unit was operating in alpine terrain created strategic uncertainty that forced Allied commanders to concentrate defensive resources in areas where German mountain troops had never actually been deployed, multiplying the tactical impact through psychological warfare. More significantly, Brenner had developed innovative mountain assault techniques that exploited Allied weaknesses in high-altitude combat, using German advantages in cold weather equipment and specialized training to achieve tactical results that conventional military doctrine considered impossible in alpine terrain where weather conditions and elevation effects typically favored defensive operations. But Brenner had never faced an opponent like Samuel Richardson, whose understanding of Colorado snow dynamics and Rocky Mountain weather patterns was about to prove that sometimes mountain warfare could be decided by civilian knowledge rather than military training when traditional techniques were applied with scientific understanding of natural forces. The Colorado miner who understood snow had grown up in a family where mountain survival wasn't just outdoor recreation but a daily necessity that sustained mining communities through economic hardships that required creative solutions to problems that conventional approaches couldn't solve in high-altitude environments where winter weather created life-threatening challenges that could eliminate entire mining operations if proper snow management techniques weren't understood and applied. Samuel Richardson was 26 years old, the grandson of Colorado miners who had arrived in the Rocky Mountains during the 1890s gold rush and established mining operations at elevations above 11,000 feet that required working in extreme weather conditions where understanding snow behavior was essential for preventing avalanches that could kill entire mining crews and destroy equipment that represented years of accumulated investment. Jake Richardson had been born in 1875 into a family of Colorado prospectors who had learned mountain survival through necessity during the early days of Rocky Mountain mining, when successful operations depended on understanding weather patterns and snow dynamics that could determine whether mining crews survived the winter or were buried under avalanches that claimed dozens of lives every season throughout the Colorado mining districts. The Richardson family mining operations had become legendary throughout the Colorado Rockies for their ability to work safely in conditions that defeated other mining companies, because Jake had developed avalanche prediction and control methods that allowed year-round operations at elevations where other miners were forced to shut down during winter months due to snow dangers that conventional safety procedures couldn't address. Jake Richardson had learned mountain techniques from his father, who had survived the blizzard of 1888 by understanding how to read snow conditions and predict weather patterns that other miners couldn't interpret. Because Colorado mining families had to develop survival skills that went beyond conventional mountaineering to include meteorological analysis and terrain assessment that incorporated scientific understanding of how snow behaved under different temperature and pressure conditions. Sam, boy, his grandfather had said while teaching him the secrets of snow analysis that could predict avalanche conditions and control snow movement through strategic terrain modification, his weathered hands demonstrating techniques that had been refined through decades of Rocky Mountain experience. Snow isn't just frozen water, it's a living force that responds to temperature, wind, and pressure changes in ways that follow natural laws but require local knowledge to predict accurately. When you understand how snow behaves, you can make it work for you instead of against you, whether you're clearing mine shafts or stopping enemies who think they own the mountains. The specific techniques that would stop Brenner's Gebirgsjäger had been developed by Jake Richardson through decades of Colorado mining experience that required creating controlled avalanches to clear dangerous snow accumulations while preventing uncontrolled slides that could destroy mining equipment and kill workers who depended on accurate snow assessment for survival in high-altitude environments where meteorological conditions changed rapidly. Sam's education in mountain survival had been practical rather than theoretical, requiring him to understand not just how to predict snow behavior but why specific conditions created avalanche risks that could be controlled through strategic intervention using explosives placement and terrain modification that incorporated scientific principles with traditional mountain knowledge. The avalanche control methods that Jake had perfected required precise understanding of snow layer analysis, temperature gradient assessment, and wind pattern recognition that allowed accurate prediction of when snow accumulations would become unstable and how controlled explosive charges could trigger beneficial slides while preventing catastrophic avalanches that could threaten mining operations. Sam had enlisted in the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division in 1942 immediately after Pearl Harbor, despite having an essential occupation exemption that would have kept him in critical mining operations throughout the war, contributing to strategic mineral production that was considered essential for American military manufacturing. But Sam couldn't stand the thought of mountain troops dying while he stayed safely in Colorado, even though his mining skills were desperately needed for producing materials that were essential for weapons manufacturing. The transition from civilian mining to military mountain warfare had been challenging because Army procedures emphasized standardized mountaineering techniques and regulation equipment rather than the improvised methods and traditional knowledge that made Colorado mining successful under conditions that defeated conventional approaches to mountain survival and terrain navigation in high-altitude environments. Military mountain training had been challenging for Sam because Army procedures emphasized standardized mountaineering techniques and regulation equipment rather than the improvised methods and traditional knowledge that made Colorado mining successful under conditions that defeated conventional approaches to mountain survival and terrain navigation. Because military doctrine prioritized equipment standardization over local adaptation. Richardson, his commanding officer, had said after Sam's snow techniques had been used to prevent an avalanche that would have buried the entire company during training operations in the Colorado Rockies, his voice reflecting amazement at civilian techniques that had achieved results beyond military mountaineering capabilities. "Those mountain skills of yours seem to handle problems that our standard procedures can't solve. Keep them ready for situations that require unconventional solutions that military training never anticipated." The respect that Sam's mountain techniques had earned among 10th Mountain Division personnel was based on their proven effectiveness in solving problems that conventional military mountaineering couldn't address, demonstrating that civilian knowledge could complement military training when properly applied by personnel who understood both traditional techniques and modern tactical requirements. But the real test of Sam's mountain wisdom would come when the 10th Mountain Division was assigned to defend the strategic Alpine pass that controlled access to Allied supply lines supporting the Italian campaign, where German success could disrupt operations that were essential for maintaining the momentum of Allied advances toward Germany. The deadly mountain battle that almost ended everything began when German High Command ordered Brenner's Gebirgsjäger to capture the strategic Alpine pass that controlled the only route suitable for Allied heavy equipment moving between the Italian front and Austrian approaches, where German control could isolate Allied mountain positions and force a tactical withdrawal that would compromise the entire Italian campaign and potentially allow German forces to establish defensive positions that could prolong the war for months. The 10th Mountain Division had been assigned to defend the pass using conventional mountain warfare tactics that relied on established defensive positions and coordinated fire support, but Brenner's Gebirgsjäger were specifically trained to defeat these defensive measures through superior alpine mobility and specialized mountain attack techniques that had proven successful during campaigns across multiple mountain theaters throughout occupied Europe. The strategic importance of the Alpine Pass extended far beyond local tactical considerations, because German control of the route would enable Wehrmacht forces to move reinforcements and supplies between the Italian and Austrian fronts while simultaneously cutting Allied supply lines that were essential for supporting mountain operations throughout the region, creating operational advantages that could affect the entire Central European campaign. The tactical challenge facing Colonel James Peterson of the 10th Mountain Division was essentially hopeless according to conventional mountain warfare doctrine, because Brenner's mountain troops could approach Allied positions using routes that conventional defensive planning had considered impassable due to elevation, weather exposure, and technical mountaineering requirements that exceeded the capabilities of standard infantry formations. Colonel Peterson had commanded mountain operations throughout the Italian campaign since the 1943 invasion of Sicily and understood that Gebirgsjäger tactics were based on superior mountaineering skills and specialized equipment that allowed smaller German units to defeat larger Allied forces through tactical advantages that exploited terrain features and weather conditions that conventional military doctrine considered obstacles rather than assets. The defensive positions that the 10th Mountain Division had established were designed according to standard military engineering principles for mountain warfare, but these positions had been planned by officers who lacked experience with the specialized Alpine assault techniques that German mountain troops had developed through years of combat operations in environments where conventional tactical doctrine proved inadequate. The weather conditions during the German assault were optimal for Gebirgsjäger operations, with steady snowfall that provided concealment for movement while maintaining sufficient visibility for tactical coordination, creating environmental advantages that German mountain troops were specifically trained to exploit through specialized equipment and techniques that conventional forces couldn't match. Sam had been preparing avalanche control equipment when the alarm sounded and every man in the division rushed to defensive positions, transforming routine mountain patrol into preparation for Alpine warfare that could determine whether German mountain troops would break through Allied defensive lines and threaten the entire Italian front through strategic control of mountain passes that governed supply routes. Richardson, secure that mining gear and report to forward positions. Sergeant Williams had shouted as the 10th Mountain Division prepared for mountain combat against an enemy that could attack from any direction using terrain that conventional military training had never prepared them to defend, because German mountain warfare doctrine incorporated mountaineering techniques that exceeded the scope of standard Allied military education. The German approach routes that Brenner's Gebirgsjäger were using had been considered impassable by Allied intelligence analysts who had assessed the terrain using conventional military criteria rather than specialized mountaineering expertise, creating tactical surprise that eliminated many of the defensive advantages that Allied forces had assumed they possessed through superior positioning. But Sam had an idea that was either brilliant or insane, depending on how well he understood the physics of snow dynamics and the meteorological conditions that governed avalanche formation in alpine terrain where strategic snow placement could create natural barriers that no amount of German mountain training could overcome, because the laws of physics governing snow behavior operated independently of military expertise. The inspiration for Sam's avalanche technique had come from his grandfather's stories about using controlled snow slides to stop claim jumpers during Colorado mining disputes, when conventional defensive methods failed but properly triggered avalanches could halt attackers who thought they understood mountain warfare better than local miners who had developed survival techniques through generations of Rocky Mountain experience. If controlled slides can stop claim jumpers in Colorado, Sam muttered to himself as he began analyzing alpine snow conditions using techniques that no military manual had ever described, maybe they can stop German mountain troops who think they own every peak in Europe but don't understand how Rocky Mountain snow science works when applied to alpine conditions that follow the same physical laws. The meteorology of Sam's plan was based on understanding how temperature gradients and wind patterns affected snow stability in alpine terrain, because the weather conditions during the German advance had created snow accumulations that could be triggered into avalanches through strategic placement of explosive charges that would convert potential energy into kinetic force capable of moving thousands of tons of snow down predetermined slope paths. The technique required precise timing and perfect understanding of mountain weather systems, because failure would expose Allied positions to German attack while success would create natural barriers that could channel Brenner's advance into terrain where conventional defensive weapons could achieve maximum effectiveness against concentrated targets that had lost their tactical mobility advantages. But success would also require Sam to position himself in locations where triggering avalanches meant accepting personal risk that could result in being buried by the same snow slides that were designed to stop German mountain troops, because avalanche control in combat conditions meant working in exposed positions under enemy fire while handling explosive charges that could malfunction or detonate prematurely. The moment that changed everything came at 0830 hours when Brenner's Gebirgsjäger began their final assault on the Allied defensive positions, using specialized mountain routes that conventional military intelligence had considered physically impossible to traverse but which German Alpine expertise could navigate through superior mountaineering skills and cold weather equipment that allowed sustained operations in conditions that would incapacitate conventional infantry forces. "Here they come!" Corporal Martinez shouted as German mountain troops appeared on multiple ridgelines simultaneously, demonstrating tactical coordination that had never been successfully countered by Allied mountain forces during 3 years of Alpine warfare across occupied Europe, because Brenner's Gebirgsjäger could execute complex maneuvers that required individual mountaineering skills beyond the capabilities of standard military training. Sam positioned himself at the critical avalanche trigger point that his snow analysis had identified as the optimal location for creating controlled slides that would block German advance routes while protecting Allied positions from the kinetic effects of moving snow masses that could destroy friend and enemy positions equally if the avalanche control calculations were incorrect. The snow conditions that Sam had analyzed using Colorado mining techniques indicated that the alpine terrain contained approximately 50,000 tons of accumulated snow that had achieved critical instability due to temperature fluctuations and wind loading that had created the precise meteorological conditions necessary for triggered avalanche formation using strategic explosive placement. "Holy Jesus, would you look at that!" Sergeant Williams shouted as Sam's precisely timed explosive charges triggered massive avalanches that swept down multiple mountain faces simultaneously, creating natural barriers that blocked German advance routes while channeling surviving Gebirgsjäger into kill zones where Allied defensive fire could achieve maximum effectiveness against targets that had lost their tactical mobility advantages. The Colorado snow techniques that Jake Richardson had developed through 4 generations of Rocky Mountain mining experience created avalanche conditions that converted thousands of tons of accumulated alpine snow into moving barriers that no amount of German mountain training could overcome, Because the laws of physics governing snow dynamics operated independently of military expertise and followed natural principles that were universal regardless of tactical doctrine. The avalanche that Sam triggered using his grandfather's mining techniques moved down the mountain face at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour, carrying approximately 30,000 tons of snow, ice, and debris that created a natural barrier over 200 feet wide and 40 feet deep that completely blocked the primary German approach route while creating secondary barriers that channeled any surviving German mountain troops into predetermined defensive positions. The kinetic energy released by Sam's controlled avalanche was equivalent to the explosive force of several artillery barrages, but unlike conventional weapons that created temporary tactical effects, the avalanche barriers remained in place and continued to function as defensive obstacles that could not be cleared by German engineering units without specialized equipment and time that the tactical situation did not allow. But Sam's avalanche technique had done more than create tactical barriers. It had eliminated the German advantage in Alpine mobility by forcing Brenner's mountain troops to approach Allied positions through terrain that favored defensive fire rather than specialized mountain attack techniques that had proven successful during previous Gebirgsjäger operations throughout the European mountain theaters. The psychological impact on Brenner's Gebirgsjäger was devastating because their confidence in German mountain warfare superiority had been shattered by natural forces that no military training had prepared them to counter, demonstrating that Allied forces had developed capabilities that exceeded German tactical assumptions about the limitations of enemy mountain warfare capabilities. Have any of your family mountain skills ever helped solve problems that conventional approaches couldn't handle? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one and would love to hear how traditional knowledge helped in challenging mountain situations that required innovative solutions. Brenner himself was experiencing his first tactical defeat in 3 years of mountain warfare, struggling to understand how Allied forces had neutralized German Alpine advantages through environmental manipulation that no military training had prepared his troops to counter or overcome, because German mountain warfare doctrine had never anticipated enemy forces that could use natural phenomena as tactical weapons. Achtung! Avalanche zones are blocking all approach routes. Brenner's reconnaissance leader reported as the Gebirgsjäger found themselves trapped between natural barriers created by Sam's snow techniques and Allied defensive positions that commanded the only remaining routes suitable for mountain troop movement, eliminating the tactical flexibility that German mountain doctrine required for successful operations. The tactical situation that Sam's avalanche control had created was unprecedented in German mountain warfare experience, because Brenner's Gebirgsjäger had been forced into terrain that negated their advantages in Alpine mobility while exposing them to concentrated Allied defensive fire from positions that provided commanding fields of fire and covered retreat routes. The avalanche barriers that Sam had created using Colorado mining techniques continued to function as designed, maintaining their blocking effect while channeling any remaining German mountain troops into predetermined kill zones where the 10th Mountain Division could engage targets using conventional weapons rather than competing with superior German mountaineering skills that had proven decisive in previous mountain warfare engagements. The precision of Sam's avalanche control demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mountain meteorology that exceeded the technical knowledge available to conventional military engineers, proving that civilian expertise could achieve tactical results that formal military education had never anticipated through application of traditional knowledge that incorporated scientific principles with practical experience. The Battle of the Powder Slide, as it would later be called in 10th Mountain Division records, resulted in the first tactical defeat of Brenner's Gebirgsjäger and the successful defense of the strategic Alpine Pass, marking the end of German mountain warfare dominance and proving that civilian knowledge could neutralize military expertise when properly applied. Brenner himself was forced to order tactical withdrawal after losing over 60% of his mountain troops to avalanche effects and Allied defensive fire, becoming the first German mountain commander to retreat from an objective during the entire European campaign. Richardson, Colonel Peterson said during the post-battle assessment, "I've been commanding mountain troops for 2 years, and I've never seen defensive techniques like what your avalanche control accomplished. How do you explain stopping the most elite mountain unit in the German army using mining techniques?" Sam's answer became part of 10th Mountain Division tradition and established civilian expertise as a valuable complement to military training. "Sir, my grandfather always said that mountains don't belong to the people who climb them, they belong to the people who understand how they work." Those Germans were great climbers, but they didn't understand Rocky Mountain snow science, and alpine snow follows the same laws of physics whether it's in Colorado or Austria. The tactical innovation that Sam had demonstrated was immediately studied by U.S. Army mountain warfare specialists who analyzed how Colorado mining techniques could be applied to military operations, leading to the development of avalanche warfare doctrine that incorporated civilian knowledge with conventional mountain combat tactics. But the most significant impact was on German mountain operations throughout the remainder of the war, because Brenner's defeat had demonstrated that Allied forces could neutralize Gebirgsjäger advantages through innovative applications of civilian knowledge that German mountain warfare doctrine had never anticipated. The scientific explanation for Sam's success revealed the sophisticated meteorological principles that Colorado miners had developed through generations of Rocky Mountain experience, creating avalanche control methods that functioned as tactical weapons through understanding of natural forces that military engineering had never formally studied. Colorado mining represents a form of applied meteorology that incorporates snow dynamics and terrain analysis superior to conventional military mountaineering, explained Professor Michael Henderson from the Colorado School of Mines during a post-war analysis of the incident. The ripple effects of Sam's victory extended throughout Allied mountain operations as other units began incorporating civilian mountain techniques into their tactical capabilities, proving that traditional knowledge could enhance military effectiveness when properly integrated with conventional mountain warfare doctrine. The human story that made it all meaningful was preserved in letters between Sam and his grandfather in Colorado, documenting not just the technical details of avalanche control but the cultural traditions that had enabled a Colorado miner to defeat German mountain warfare expertise through understanding of natural forces. "Grandfather," Sam wrote in a letter to Jake Richardson after the Alpine battle, "your snow technique stopped a German mountain brigade that the army couldn't defeat with conventional tactics." For generations of Colorado knowledge proved stronger than German mountain training, just like you always said it would when properly applied to Rocky Mountain conditions. Jake Richardson's response revealed the connection between traditional knowledge and survival that had sustained mining communities through generations of challenges. "Sam, I told you that snow is a living force that can work for you or against you depending on whether you understand how to read its behavior." Those Germans learned what Colorado miners have always known, that mountains belong to the people who understand them, not the people who think they can conquer them through training alone. Sam Richardson proved that mountain warfare could be influenced by factors that had nothing to do with military training when traditional knowledge was properly understood and applied by someone who respected natural forces while having the courage to use civilian techniques in military situations that required innovative solutions to problems that conventional tactical doctrine couldn't address. The post-war legacy of Sam's innovation extended far beyond mountain warfare to influence how military forces incorporated civilian expertise into their operations, demonstrating that traditional knowledge could provide solutions to modern problems when applied by people who understood both the old techniques and the new challenges created by technological warfare in specialized environments. But perhaps the most important lesson from Sam's story was that family traditions and cultural knowledge represented forms of human expertise that couldn't be replaced by military training, because they incorporated understanding of natural forces and practical solutions that had been refined through generations of real-world testing under the most challenging conditions that civilian life could produce. The avalanche control techniques that stopped Brenner's Gebirgsjäger continued to influence U.S. Army mountain warfare doctrine throughout the remainder of World War II and beyond, becoming part of specialized training programs that incorporated civilian knowledge with military tactical requirements for operations in mountain environments where conventional approaches proved inadequate. After the war, Sam returned to Colorado and resumed mining operations using the same techniques his grandfather had taught him, but he never forgot that Rocky Mountain knowledge had proven itself in the most extreme circumstances possible, alpine warfare against professional enemies who represented the best that modern military mountain warfare training could produce. The story of the Colorado Avalanche became part of 10th Mountain Division tradition, told in training facilities and veterans gatherings as an example of how traditional knowledge could complement modern military capabilities when applied by people who understood both civilian techniques and military requirements for achieving tactical objectives under combat conditions. So here's the question Sam's story poses: When facing challenges that seem to require specialized training, how do you recognize when traditional knowledge might provide more effective solutions than conventional approaches? What family skills do you carry that might prove unexpectedly valuable in situations that seem completely unrelated to their original purpose? And how do you honor the wisdom of previous generations while having the courage to apply that wisdom in ways they never imagined possible? What family traditions or inherited knowledge do you think might prove valuable in unexpected ways? Leave your thoughts in the comments. These stories of traditional wisdom meeting modern challenges remind us that every family carries expertise that has been refined through generations of real-world testing, and that wisdom never truly becomes obsolete when properly understood and courageously applied to new situations that require innovative thinking rather than conventional solutions.